Go ahead and jump into our next panel here, which is the making of The Snail and the Whale. And Benoit, I'm going to flip it over to you and let you introduce everybody.
Yes, thank you so much for welcoming us on CTN. I'm super happy today to be joined and to interview Daniel Snaddon and Max Lang, the two co-directors of The Snail and the Whale. Guys, actually, can you introduce you quickly to the one who don't know you yet?
Hi, my name is Max Lang. I'm one of the directors of Snail and the Whale. Previously, I've directed the Gruffalo, Room on the Broom, and Zog, and I'll hand it over to Dan.
Yeah, I'm Daniel Snaddon. I'm based in Cape Town, South Africa, and I'm the other director of Snail and the Whale. And I've worked with Max on Zog. Also, we co-directed that together, and before that, I co-directed Stickman, also for Magic Light Pictures.
So the Snail and the Whale is the latest short form Magic Light Picture that is used to do every year like gorgeous and heartwarming shorts adapted from children books. They got quite, some recognition, some Oscar nomination and BAFTA winning. Can you tell us a little bit more after directing other shorts from Magic Light Picture? What makes The Snail and the Whale unique to you guys?
Well, for me, it's really quite special, this one, because back in the days when we were working on the Gruffalo in 2008, we were looking at all the picture books from Julia Donaldson and Axel Scheffler, and I really fell in love with The Snail and the Whale. I would say it's probably one of my favorite picture books all time. And so I've been kind of dreaming about making this film for over 10 years. And it's just such a really nice message about that feels very relevant. When you think about it, it's like it has this environmental message, but it's not too on the nose. It's more about celebrating the beauty of our planet and also telling you that no one is too small to make a difference, like in your community with the people you love. And yeah, so that we actually got to make this film now, it just felt like this dream come true for me. And it turned out to be, I would say, probably also the most challenging one, not just technologically, but also in terms of adapting it.
And actually, about adapting the script, how did you? The writing a book and illustrating a book is so different from making a film. So I guess you had many challenges in terms of the adaptation. How did you success to adapt the book? You had like one big challenge, I guess, was the scale, because the whale is massive and the snail is very tiny. So how did you manage that?
Well, so I adapted this together with my wife, Suzanne. And since the Gruffalo, one of the key things that's always the same with adapting all these books is that we want to stay really, really true to the original text that Julia wrote and very true to the illustrations. And so that means we don't really add new dialogue or any new narration to the text. And so that is always a challenge. You turn a 7-minute book into a 25-minute film without adding any new dialogue. And so that's kind of the consistent part. But then each picture book and each story is actually very different from each other and comes with its own challenges. And for The Snail and the Whale, the one thing that we were really struggling with and trying to get right for years was how do you make these two characters that are so vastly different in scale? Like, I would say you can't even fit them together in one screen, like, and read their emotions, because once you show the whale full picture, you can hardly see the snail. When you see the snail, you can maybe see the eye of the whale. There's not much you can do. In addition, they are characters that don't have body language to like an awful lot. Like it's not like you can use your hands or to bring a point across. So that was really always a big question, because we had to make sure that this connection is established and this friendship develops over their journey, and yet they couldn't talk too much to each other. They couldn't interact too much with each other. And that was the big question that we kept mulling over for several years, actually, until, and ultimately—
I think we have a little extract about that. Perhaps we can play while you will play this first extract, if Sitien has it on his, yes, perfect.
And so while we do try to address all these things already in the script and try to visualize it as we're writing it, a big part also is then the storyboarding and trying to actually move it into the media that it ultimately will be in. Because ultimately you can write in a script, the two characters connect. You won't have these words on the screen. You have to show that visually. Luckily, you have other things at your disposal as a filmmaker, like camera framing, acting, music is a big part. So even when we're writing the script, we always try to visualize it and try to make sure that in the writing, we're not kind of using words that you couldn't express visually later on.
There was a moment of victory, I remember, where, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen it, but there is towards the end a moment where Snail and the Whale kind of do a little hug. And it's essentially the frame is a giant eyeball, and then the snail kind of going up to this giant eyeball and kind of nuzzling against this giant eyeball. And when we showed the animation to the team at Triggerfish, we got this, oh, kind of warm response, not like this, ugh, it's a snail and a giant eyeball. So we were like, okay, cool, this can work. this is working.
And so you both directed different films from Magic for Magic Like Picture. Daniel, you participated as well directing Zog as well last year, and
yes.
Also other films like Stickman, correct?
That's right. Yes.
And so you, Max, you also directed the Room and the Broom, the Gruffalo. How has the process of making this film evolved since the Gruffalo and all the other films you did?
Well, obviously there are lots of like technological progressions, and the technology evolves. A lot of this goes quite incremental, and you learn things along the way as you make these films. And what I would say is the biggest difference from looking at the Gruffalo and Snail and the Whale is that when we were doing the Gruffalo, there was a lot of uncertainty. We didn't know, can we take a 7-minute book and make it into a 25-minute film? Is anyone going to want to watch that? Is it going to work? How is this all going to come together? And most importantly, we didn't know each other. I hadn't worked with Magic Like Pictures in the studio before. And so I feel like the biggest difference is really that there's a lot of trust within the relationship between Magic Like Pictures. Michael and Martin, the two producers, and the directors have a very, very close relationship. I would say we're friends, and same goes with the studio. Like there's so much that when you make a film, where you just have to rely on your team and the producers, and you have to trust each other, and you have to trust that you all have the same vision and everyone is doing their best to get it across. And that only comes with experience and with a history of working together. So while there are all these technological advances, the really meaningful one, or the most important one, I think, for me is really that trust that there is in our relationship. Because when you look at the Snail and the Whale, it is definitely the most challenging film we've ever made. And when we were looking at it with all the backstory and the history of the other films, on paper, it was really like, we can't make this film. And now, again, speaking to the trust, we had to trust our producers. Yeah, this looks pretty impossible. On Zog, we had a few water effects, and we worked a year on getting them right. And now we had a film that was full of water effects. And how do we make this work? We have to go around the world. We need all these assets. We have to create it. And the biggest difference, I would say, is that the benefit that we had was that we had a team that had really grown with all these films and was able to take a big part of the load. And we, as directors, were able to trust them and let them run with it. So, and I think that's the only way it was possible to make it.
But actually, how did you two guys met each other? What was it on the first film you collaborated, or you also both work on the Revolting Rhymes, not as directors, but you participated to the film, right?
That's right. So Max and I actually met before we knew we were going to work together. But we'd emailed a little bit back and forth when I got the job to do Stickman. I emailed Max and asked him, "Hey, I'm going to be a co-director. What can you recommend a co-director should do?" and he has very good advice. He said, "Well, as long as you don't tell the team one thing and the other director tells the team something else, you should be all right." So I've taken that advice to heart. But we met, my wife and I were traveling in America, and I gave Max a heads up, just saying we're going to be passing through Los Angeles, and we met for lunch, and just talked about some of the stuff that we've been working on, and I got a phone call from Magic like 2 weeks later saying, "Hey, we're going to develop Zog into a film. Would you like to work with Max on that?" And we decided to make Zog together, having only met once, and it's been a wonderful experience. It's been a real, been such a privilege to work with Max on these movies.
But directing Zog was not your first directing experience, Daniel, right?
That's right. Yeah. So I worked with Jeroen Jasper on Stickman, and that was also a really amazing experience, and I learned a heck of a lot from him. He gave me his laser vision.
Did those films as well helped you, and you saw the things evolving as well along the path?
That's right. So that first film that Triggerfish made with Magic Light, that was started in 2014, and we were kind of picking up the baton from Studio Soul, who made those other wonderful specials, and we were super intimidated. The quality was so high, and we were moving. Because Stickman, like Snail the Whale, there were so many different locations, and there were all the different seasons. It started in summer, it went all the way to winter, and we knew that we would have to kind of do an all CG pipeline. So we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to really capture the essence of the look that Max and Jacob and Jan and Uwe and the rest of the guys had set in those early specials. And it was not easy. There was so much beautiful attention to detail that were put into those films. So trying to figure out a way to express that in the computer was a real challenge. And luckily Jeroen was a great captain on that first project.
So you talked earlier, Max, about all the technical challenges, and so I would like to dig with you two guys in this technical side. What were the biggest technical challenges that you had to go through to make this happen? Daniel, I think you're muted.
Right, so thanks Benoit. I'm gonna share my screen quickly because I have a couple of things to illustrate some of the challenges. Can you tell me if you can see this?
Yeah.
Ooh, shucks. That's, sorry, this is not working. Gotta go to the top of my presentation. Okay, can you see this? It says technical challenges.
Yes, it works.
Great. So the biggest challenge that we had in Snail the Whale was the water, as Max mentioned. And just for anyone who's interested who isn't involved in VFX heavily, and Max and I, neither of us come from a VFX background. So we had to really learn with our VFX team the approach. There are two approaches for creating water in CGI, mainly. The first one, which I think most people are familiar with, is simulation, which is trying to approximate real physics in the computer. So what you do when you simulate water is that you build a virtual tank around your animation. You fill it with particles, and each of those particles are almost like a molecule. And you apply gravity and other sort of forces, and all these particles interact with your animation to create the simulation, and you have to kind of crunch the numbers on that. You mesh it so that you can render it, and you give it a surface so that you can film it, and that creates the reflectivity and all that kind of stuff, and you have water. And the pros to doing simulation are that you can get it very close to life. I mean, the whole idea of simulating water is to try to recreate reality in some kind of form. It can look really great. However, it can be quite expensive, because when you are trying to recreate reality in a computer so that it looks like something that you have in your mind, or it looks like a piece of reference, trying to get all those different factors to work in harmony to give you a result, it can take a lot of iterations. Each iteration takes time to calculate. So it can take quite a long time to get, so it's quite expensive.
Would it be possible, sorry, Daniel, to put the slide on full screen? I think your screen is showing presenter note. Can you do that?
Shucks.
Then those are drawings, so it's all good. But I know you will have like some details, images later on. So,
yes, that's very true. Sorry.
You have to find the right view for us to have
Is this it?
Yes. So exactly.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks.
HD.
All right. So the second way that you can approach, which is the cheaper way, is to cheat it, right? So you can use some of the tricks in 3D to approximate water without having to do any expensive simulations. So the way that we kind of, the main approach that we took was to create what we call the spectrum. I think this is a term that we got from other people who have done amazing water effects before. And essentially what you do is you take a polygon plane, you apply a deformer over it that's procedurally generated. So you create your water surface using some kind of deformation. For any points of interaction, you can use solvers. So anyone who's used to 3D, these are things like ripples and just very basic deformations. And you can use the animation to trigger those, or you can do it yourself by hand. And you can get a really nice effect, actually. And this is very scalable. It's unlike simulation. The bigger the tank is, the more particles you have, the more calculations you have to do. Using this kind of approach, you really can you can get something that's really, really big. And for most of the film, the whale is at sea, right? So this was our main approach. So the pros to this is that it's fast, it's predictable, it's art directable, which is for directors, that's like super important to us. During the film, The Whale, he's in everything from very calm, peaceful tropical waters to, enormous waves that almost look like he's, in the middle of a tsunami or something like that. So we really needed to be able to predict what that water was going to look like. The cons are that as nice as these techniques are, you really can't splash and you really can't foam or spray. Those have to be simulated. And if you look at what whales do in water, a lot of the time, when they breach, there's a lot of beautiful, detail. There's a lot of lovely spray and that kind of thing. So what our team did was to combine these two approaches, because we're working on quite under some quite heavy restrictions. I mean, it's a TV special, and it's a high quality TV special, but it's still a TV special. It doesn't have a huge feature budget. So the kind of quite elegant solution they came up with was to limit the simulations to just around the whale. So you build the tank wherever the whale was going to interact with the water. You do your simulations with your particles, you mesh that out, and then you combine that with this big spectrum plane. And you kind of use the tools to knit them together. And you should have something that looks, integrated. So we thought this sounds amazing. And we set off bright-eyed and bushy-tailed with our brand new pipeline. And we used a Maya for animation. We used Houdini for all our effects and all our simulations, and Arnold to render. But because all our lighting artists weren't familiar with Houdini, we actually had to find a way to get all our Houdini stuff back into Maya. So I'm going to show you, we had one shot that became a bit of a stone around our necks, because it took about, I think we started it in, I want to say, Max, I don't know if you remember, I think it was like the October in 2018. And I think it was approved, I want to say like May or June in 2019. It was the sort of, it was the real proof of concept. And this is the first test that they did. And I know this is probably going to jump a bit, but it does illustrate sort of the thinking really well. And this was something they showed us really early, and we were like, wow, that actually looks pretty great right off the bat. So you can see the spectrum. You can see the edge of that simulation tank there where the foam cuts off. And you can kind of see, where it breaks. That's the simulation tank, and that's the spectrum. So we thought, this is great. We're going to have a result in no time. Well, then we spent all these months sort of going through iteration after iteration. And I must point out that the team are not just trying to solve stitching the tank and the spectrum together. There's a lot of other problems that they're trying to solve. So what we originally thought we would have to do is export all the mesh that we created when we combined the simulation and the spectrum together into one mesh, and export that as a Lembex back into Maya for the lightest to light. And that didn't turn out to be feasible for the computers we had. We just didn't have the processing power. This is really interesting. So this, you can see there's quite a lot of success in kind of getting this to look like one thing. But where the tank and the spectrum join, there's this kind of like, something's happening there. It's like an invisible wall. So this was something where we had managed to kind of combine the tank and the spectrum, but we hadn't. Well, what ended up happening is, to get the alembic to be small enough, we ended up losing all the detail. You can see that the water here looks really kind of glassy and chunky, and that was the thing that we ended up fighting the most. And luckily, what we ended up doing was trying out Arnold's native exports, the file, I think they're called ASS files, or AS files, and that did the trick. Well, as soon as we started using those, we were A4 away. And so this is what the shot ended up looking like. And we, if I just pause it, you guys can see lots of nice like detail, lots of nice foam and splash and that kind of stuff. And yeah, it was a little bit of a something happening here, but I think we went back and just blurred it in post. So as I mentioned, we were kind of building a lot of very expensive looking stuff, big assets that need to be rendered. So we had a big, very anxiety inducing debate whether we stick with the devil we know, which was Arnold, or the devil we don't, which is a GPU-based rendering system like Redshift. And we saw really great things in Redshift, but we had used Arnold for everything that we had done up till then, and we loved it. You get really sophisticated results very quickly. But because we had all this water to render, we were wondering if, maybe we need to combine somehow. We were very scared of the render times in the water. But in the end, and mainly to preserve the sanity of our surfacing team, we decided to go with Arnold. And it was the idea of having to recreate the look of all the characters and the environments and deal with a brand new water pipeline that we were just like, that's too many unknown factors. So whether we missed a trick or not, we'll never know. Of course, it was a lot for Arnold to do, and we had to get a bigger render farm. It was, but it did. The results are great. I mean, at Triggerfish, we love Arnold. just talking about the scale, I mean, Max talked a little bit about the storytelling challenges. And something that we ended up having to do was, in our environments, and we had to really consider the two different scales, the macro of the, sort of seeing the whale in the environment, and then the micro, so I'm just like, of seeing the snail in the environment too, right? So the way we kind of got around this is looking at sort of shot-specific dressing and scattering around the snail for the really micro close-ups. Most of the time in the film, we're seeing things from Snail's perspective, but we're not always at her level. So when we are showing those big environments, we built those big environments to kind of be seen wide, and then went in and put detail in where we needed to. In the beginning, we thought we could get away with doing this all through surfacing, but luckily, and to Max's point about how when you have a team that's used to kind of dealing with impossible challenges and then taking the bull by the horns, it was actually our team who decided that they were going to not rely on surfacing, and kind of pitched us the idea of scattering geometry in some of these close-ups, even though it wasn't really budgeted in initially. So we were really grateful that they did that. It was something that we were getting nervous about, and the team really saved our bacon on that one. So when you're dealing with, I think it would be worth saying, when you're dealing with all these kind of technical things and you're getting kind of tunnel vision on all these really difficult things that you're trying to solve, it's easy to lose sight of the big picture. And I wanted to share a couple of near misses that we had, just two of them, but which are things that we should have caught. But again, luckily the team was on the ball. I don't know if anyone in the audience can kind of see what's wrong with this picture. I'll go back and look at the chat afterwards and see if anyone can shouted it out. But
let's try. Let's do a game. If you see the mistake, post it in the chat.
Okay, I'm going to give you 5 more seconds to post it. But
yes, there is somebody that is trying to, I think somebody found it.
Okay, great. So
Melissa
yes.
Scott, I don't know. Yes, people are finding.
So the poor texture artist who forgot that the letter W was in the alphabet was kind of mercilessly memed by the team on our Slack channel for days after it. It was people were really delighted. Yeah, this is supposed to say "Live Wanted around the world." The other thing that we thought, luckily we caught it in time, and in the version that went out, the letter W is in the movie. The other thing that we thought would be really fun to do was the teacher at some point is reading a book, and we thought to pay homage to the most famous of literary whales, Moby Dick, by having the teacher read Moby Dick. And what we didn't bank on was when the teacher, the only shot that you really see her holding the book, because the animators couldn't see the title. She was kind of covering up the covering up half the title. So what makes it even worse is that the kids kind of notice something in the shot, and then they kind of like start sniggering, like. And luckily, I think one of the comp artist caught it, and so in the book. Yeah, or in the final version, you can actually see the whole title. So yeah, so these are the kind of things that you might miss if you're so super focused on just the technical aspects of what you're doing.
So Daniel, you approached the technical side because I guess you were very closely in touch with the team building the film. But I'm curious to see how you gathered the work between you two guys, because you're not living in the same place. So what's your both specialty basically?
I would say, like, creatively, we work really, really closely together, and we didn't divvy it up too much. It's like the most important part of working remotely and not together in the same room is really talking to one another and communicating all the time. So Dan and I would definitely talked every day, probably for several hours, but also with the team. We made sure that we had standing meetings with the team. And as Dan pointed out early on, the most important part if you're directing together is that you don't send conflicting messages to the team. So we would always make sure that we're on the same page before giving notes, or if we had conflicting notes, we would try to address it and discuss it before the artists start working on it. But of course, I am based in Los Angeles, so I can't be on the ground with the team. And Dan really did the heavy lifting there. It's very important to have someone working with the team. I don't think, like, it wouldn't have been possible for me to direct the film remotely without Dan. Like, that would have never worked. And again, it comes back to having a lot of trust between each other. And I think that's the key difference between the two.
It's true, and actually that time difference kind of worked, funnily enough, in our favor, because we would always have a chance to look at Max's feedback and have a bit of a discussion internally and decide whether it was very clear what we were going to do, and if there were any things that we needed to ask, we would be able to prepare ourselves. So then when Max would come online in South Africa, it would usually be around about 2 or 3 o'clock. And Max would get up really early in the morning. So we would see like the sun coming up behind him, usually during our Skype sessions. So funnily enough, that time difference actually kind of allowed a very smooth working relationship with Max. And I will say as well that because this is a movie that Max has wanted to make for 10 years, he came at the beginning of the project with such a clear vision for the film. It was really easy for me to buy into it and for me to get excited about it. So I'm really grateful for all that thought and care Max had put into the first versions of the animatic. And yeah, so we really benefited a lot from that too.
But Daniel, you're an animator, or what's your background?
That's right. So I'm a 2D and 3D animator and a storyboard artist mainly. And I think that the thing that I find really interesting about working as an animator on these projects is just each character has very specific challenges, and with Snail and the Whale specifically, as Max said, they don't have a lot of instruments, and it's almost like an exercise in minimalism. You know, trying to express as much as you can with as little as possible. It's almost like if you can think of a human as a grand piano with a lot of different notes and things you can play. The whale is like a bongo drum. You can do certain things, and you can make beautiful music, but you have to do, you don't have fingers and you don't have, you can't see 2 eyes at the same time.
And you, Max, what's your background in the animation industry?
Well, originally I worked as a 2D animator, but then pivoted mostly to storyboard and character design as the industry shifted to CG. So I understand animation on a principle level, but not technically. I can't use Maya or anything like that. And what we always tried on these films to do as much as possible, like hands-on ourselves as a director. So we usually start with a very small team in the beginning, when there's a lot of like questions flowing around and we want to be quick and to change things. So early on, it's really mostly Dan and I talking. We had one storyboarder, Christian Pui, who is already boarding on the Gruffalo. He helped us a lot on this because we were also doing Zog at the same time. And then we're mostly working with Martin and Michael from Magic Light Pictures, and we try to keep it very, very smooth and quick to make very quick iterations. And so it comes in really handy if you can do stuff yourself as a director. So we draw and edit a lot of the animatic and have very, very quick turnarounds and iterations of the story, but overall work on it for 6 months in a very, very small team.
And so when the production was kicking at its high, how big was the team? Because you also worked with a studio like in South Africa, right? Triggerfish.
Yes, at Triggerfish, I think I had a look the other day. I think at our height we had around about 70 artists on the ground, but then all the post-production, the sound and music is all done in London with teams there, yeah, so it's really nice. And Triggerfish has a philosophy of really trying to get young talent in. So whenever I look at these films, one of the things that's really amazing to me is that a big chunk of the team, this is the first thing they've worked on straight out of college, and they do really amazing work. So we've got a lot of really talented young artists in South Africa who have cut their teeth on these Magic Light shows, which is really cool.
And so in the team and in the, what did you look for in each of the roles, basically? What were you looking for to make the film mainly?
So we had an interesting situation, which was that originally, actually, I think Triggerfish was a bit was shifting focus. They've been working on a feature film for the last, I think, 2.5 years. And so that was going to initially clash quite heavily with starting Snail and the Whale. The reason that they decided to give it a real go is because we discovered that there was a real opportunity to R&D the water pipeline, because their feature is set also on the ocean. But it did mean that a lot of the key sort of supervisors that we had on Zog, Highway Rats, Revolting Rhymes, Stickmen, were moving on to lead roles in the feature. So Max and I and Mike Buckland and Kaya at Triggerfish, we had to kind of find a new team of management and leadership out of the younger crew, and so what we found is that people kind of came forward with ideas, and that's really, what was really fantastic is that a lot of our leads on Snail and the Whale will put their hand up and said, actually, I've got ideas about how I think we could be doing things better, how we can tackle this really big production and not hurt ourselves. And they came with ideas about changing the pipeline. I think our head of lighting, Armand, really wanted to do base lighting, and for each of the shots, which would allow us to see the water while we were testing it, as opposed to just seeing it afterwards. Because sometimes when you simulate something, it looks really great because the lights are doing something, and then when you actually try to light the shot, it looks like something completely different. So all of this, a lot of this stuff we got from our new team members, and we were really grateful. I mean, they were really fantastic. Yeah. And I think Max, I mean, you can jump in here, but I think what you're always looking for is people who are passionate, but who can communicate really clearly, and who are just who are not just competent, but are also really excited about the specific project, and then working with the rest of the team. Like trying to kind of form something that's greater than the sum of its parts, essentially. Yeah.
Nice. I can see John writing in the chat right now a little note that is actually linked to the next question. He says that he watched the film last night, and it was a truly beautiful story and animation, characters and backgrounds, which I fully agree. The voice acting was also excellent and fit perfectly. A lot of joy came through. Thank you, John, for the little note. But yes, I mean, the voice acting was spot on, and also you had like quite an amazing cast. How did you work with them, and what did they bring to the film to you?
Well, I mean, first of all, we are very, very lucky, and always always appreciate it that we are able to secure such a super talented and high profile voice cast. And I think a lot of people ask us how we get there. And one big part is that the Julia Donaldson and Axel Scheffler's books are so well known in the UK. And so lots of actors actually have read the books to their children or grandchildren, already have a connection to them. The other nice thing, and I do think that speaks for our films, is that they also are associated with a certain quality, and that has, and it comes back to trust again. So since the Gruffalo, it's been quite clear that we're always aiming at the highest quality, and I do think that that helps in securing like high profile talent. And so, yeah, as a director, it's always quite intimidating when you're suddenly standing in a room with with these people you've admired and you see on the big screen all the time, and suddenly you have to tell them what to do. So that's that's always very intimidating. Luckily, for example, Rob Brydon, we already have a very long-standing relationship with. He's been in all of our films. And so, and again, that helps. The more you get to know the people and the more they know what you are aiming for, the easier it will be. Same as Sally, she's been on Room on the Broom, and I'd kind of been dreaming of having her as a snail since we had her in Room on the Broom, because I thought she's so amazing, and I wish the Berthe would have more lines. So I was always looking for an opportunity to bring her back in. And then of course the late Dame Diana Rigg, which was probably the most intimidating one, because she's a legend, and even our producers like probably grew up with her as little boys, and that was quite funny. She always referred to us as just like, and what's boys? What do you think? And and that's how it kind of felt. Yeah. So it's quite exciting. What I will say is, of course, like they have such a big impact on the film. Like there's like, these films wouldn't be the same without these actors and with their voices. But it's, as a director, still the other thing, so many people ask us about it. Ultimately, we work with them for a few hours out of 18 months or so we work on the film. And the much more meaningful relationships as a director, for me, are the ones with your team, because you work for easily a year or longer every day together, every day. So while all these people who create the pictures and the sound and might not be as high a profile, for a director, those are the people that you rely on most, I think.
Sure, that's obvious. I think we have a little clip with sound this time where we can see two of them, Rob Brydon and Sally Hawkins, performing a little bit. Perhaps we can play it now before the last question.
That's kind of how you see yourself. And when they said they want you to be the whale, I was very flattered, because I'm not the tallest or most physically imposing of men. So I thought, the whale. The only thing I thought from the off was, let's not go down the obvious route, and because he's a whale, we give him a big voice. I thought much more effective to give him a softer voice.
I can't move on land. I'm too big.
Sally Hawkins voices the snail. She's a great actor who delivers this wonderful, characterful performance, bringing Snail to life.
So wild and free.
That's it.
Yeah,
go for it.
I got to say that watching Sally work is just, it's unbelievable. She has so many ideas. They just pour out of her. And something that I didn't realize was that she had created a voice for the snail that only when I started watching interviews again with her and watching movies, going back and watching Happy Go Lucky and stuff, I was, well, that's not Sally's voice. She actually created a specific voice for the snail. And usually we sort of tell people, well, we've cast you, we want you to use your natural voice. But she made it sound so natural. It really felt, it just fit perfectly. And I think she won a British Animation Award for her performance in SNAIL the Whale.
Yeah, I have a little thing for the attendees. If you have questions, we are almost at the end of my questions, so don't hesitate to put it in the Q&A little tab. We'll try to, I mean, Max and Daniel will try to answer all of them at the end of the session. I would like just to go back on working remotely. I mean, you did the film before COVID, obviously, but you had kind of a preview
Good training.
of...
Yeah.
Exactly. So I was wondering, I mean, this is obviously a success. The film is gorgeous, is finished and high in expectation. Do you have any advices for the people, the students or people working in the industry that are facing, obliged now to work remotely?
I mean, I think we briefly mentioned it before. The most important part, I feel, is talking every day and making sure that there's a standing flow of communication, so you don't fall into this trap of not talking, and as soon as you have a question, it becomes a big official thing and you have to call a meeting and suddenly you have to organize all of this. So we really had a standing meeting every day that was open for all the artists to ever always come in and ask questions. And even if there wasn't anything to talk about, we would at least make sure that we have a little chat and connect and see if everyone was all right, because it's just too easy to get isolated in your bubble when you're at home. So one of the beautiful things of making films is that you work in a team and that you all contribute to it. So it's good to not forget about that when you're sitting at home on your computer.
Absolutely. And I think, like Max says, it's that continuous flow of communication that allows you to talk about uncomfortable things and problems. And I think that if you only are meeting about very specific things, then everyone feels that, well, they have to have all the answers before that meeting happens. Whereas if you're talking every day, you can talk about things that are kind of not going well, or, you know, and I think as directors, it's really important that you keep on top of that stuff. You have to kind of really know, because if they're talking about it now, then, you know, you can see it coming down the line. It's not something that's going to surprise you in a couple of weeks where it's really become a problem. So I think that's something, but it's tough to do that. And I think that actually what hasn't prepared me is that, like, we just had one person to remote in with, which was Max, every day. Whereas now you get Zoom fatigue and that kind of thing. You have to talk to lots of different parties. But I think that principle remains the same. You know, if you can, as much as possible, as often as possible.
So we talked about the film, but I would like to ask this last question about you guys. What you're doing now? What's next for you? What you're cooking or not? But what's coming for you?
Me, I'm currently working as a storyboard artist. I publish picture books with my wife, but not working on another short film. Like SNAIL the Whale was really that. I've been waiting for so long to make this film, so I'm kind of like, that's just, for me, it's a dream come true. I have to figure out what to do next on that front. Yeah.
Max's book Grumpy Monkey is a favorite in our household. Our boy, who's 2 years old, asks for it a lot. It's a real hit. I'm busy working as a storyboard artist on a feature here in South Africa. And I'm developing a feature film with Triggerfish in a US studio, which we're really excited about. We're sort of working with a writer based in Zimbabwe and planning big things. So hopefully at some point we'll be able to share more on that.
Nice. I can see the clock turning, and I see we have 8 questions already in the Q&A. So I will start kicking in the question. Perhaps a quick one to answer. There is an attendee, anonymous attendee, asking how many computers were used to render the film from start to finish, and how long did it take for them to render it?
That's a great question. I did have the statistics somewhere. I tell you what, I'm going to dig up those statistics and see if I can find them, and then I'll get back to you. Hold on a second. I'm just going to do some digging. Let's go into another question, and I'll see if I can.
Yeah, I will ask another question we received to Max. What advice do you have for young teen artists or animators?
I think again, it's about communicating. Start reaching out. You have the whole world at your disposal. When I was growing up in animation, we barely had the internet, and I had to figure out a lot of stuff by myself and through books. Now you have YouTube tutorials, you have forums where you can talk to other artists and reach out to anyone that you admire and ask questions like that. So I think try to connect with other people who are like-minded and trying to do the same thing, and you'll see lots of people are struggling with the similar things. What I always find important as a general, not just for artists in the animation industry, for artists, any kind of artist, is it's easy to start something, it's very hard to finish it. And with everything you do and you finish, you learn something new that you can do better the next time, or any skills you can improve. And anything you finish will lead to something good in the long run. Someone will see it and something will come of that. If you get into this loop of not finishing stuff, you don't have anything to put out there. And that's where it becomes really tricky, because you keep working, but it's hard to get feedback. So, and that brings me back to my initial thing, the initial thing I said, is like connecting to other artists. Don't hesitate to show your work to other people. It's so easy to get stuck in this bubble of like, either you think like, I'm not good enough, you start comparing yourself to all these people who put amazing stuff out there and it's not quite there yet. But when you get fresh eyes on it, they might help you with something and you progress suddenly on a completely new level. But you also connect with people that are in the same space, and it helps. It really, really helps to not doubt yourself too much.
Daniel, do you have the statistics?
I do. So I don't have all the statistics, but I do have the number of nodes we had on Snail the Whale was 103 nodes.
Oh, wow.
And we had 4,048 threads. So I don't know if that gives you an indication. I'm trying to remember, Max, the kind of per frame render times, but I think it varied like a lot depending on the complexity of the frame. So I know that they were trying to, at some point when things were not going well, it was like 8 hours a frame or something right in the beginning.
Wow.
But they managed to get it down like a lot towards the end. I think that they had like a goal of less than an hour a frame. I'm sure most of it was less than an hour a frame. Andrew, if you're in the audience, please type it into the Q&A or into the chat. Yeah.
Another question. Go for it, Daniel. Yeah.
Oh, just to completely, I just want to completely agree with Max on his advice. I had only directed my student film and then one very small straight to DVD special that was an internal project at the studio I was at before Triggerfish, and that was the thing that got me the Stickman gig. And anyone here, I'm sure, if you were to see those other films, you'd be like, how on earth did this guy get the opportunity to make these movies? And I think that a lot of it's just being very, very fortunate. But I think to Max's point, if I hadn't directed anything, I would never have even been on the list. So definitely finish it, right? Whatever it is, you might hate it towards the end, you might think that this is not who you are and what, you know, the best you can do, but just finish it and it'll open up doors. Totally agree with that.
Daniel, you spoke about the very different scales of the shots, and we have a question about that, quite technical. Were there any issues with the scale when it came to the water? For instance, macro shots, you see a lot of detail in the water splashes, but for the close-up shots, you see things like bubbles. Were different approaches taken for the simulations?
Absolutely, yes, and in fact, the real key to kind of getting any of that stuff right as a team was to find reference of real, actual whales, and then sort of interactions of what a close up that we could reference and get our heads around, and then kind of pick apart and sort of say, well, this is what makes this look small, and this is what makes this look big, and it was really important for us to get that right, because the story is all about a tiny character and a big character, right? So the water was a big part of selling that snail is small and whale is big, and I think that if you had to ask the VFX team, I don't think any two shots were plug and play exactly the same. I think they had to really look at each shot on an individual basis and say, these are the elements that are going to sell this shot. This is what is important to get right in this shot. So yeah, so in all those different layers, the bubbles, the spray, the foam, they're all separate types of simulations that have to be set up and tweaked and then iterated on. So it's quite a labor of love. We had a great VFX team though. It gave it 110. We were very fortunate to have them.
And by the way, just to intersect that actually touches on a very important point about directing and filmmaking in general, because there's no one fits all solution for all the shots. Like each shot, you have to ask yourself, what is important about this shot? What does this shot mean for the story? What does this shot need to communicate? And that tells you what to prioritize in the shot and what to really look for. And there's a lot of gain, as you can see with the pebbles of the snail, like that only works for this one shot. If you zoom out, you see it's just a tiny patch in the sand. So you always really look through the camera and set your priorities like that. And it allows you to do much bigger and better things, because it's, you're not trying to create one thing that fits everything.
That's very true. You can almost think about like detail as like an adjective. If your whole sentence is just adjectives, like no one knows. It's just like there's too much information, but you put detail where you really want the eye to go, and you want people to get an impression.
Another question from the attendees: Did the illustrations from the book serve as inspiration for the art department, or were completely new art styles explored for the film?
Absolutely. No, the illustrations were absolutely leading the way in terms of how we would create the frames. We actually tried to somewhat quote some of the iconic illustrations from the book. So there are shots that are very, very close to the exact page. When you look through the book, and compare to the film, you'll find it easily. But of course, we also have to extrapolate from there and create a much, much bigger world around these illustrations. But we're always trying to stay very true to what Axel has done. Yeah.
We have like a few questions as well about the animation style. Some people are mentioning the style, stop motion film style. Do you have a few things to say about that style that you choose, why you choose, and how you made it happen?
Yeah. So in terms of the character animation and trying to make it feel inspired by stop motion, we really took our cues from you guys, Max and Room on the Broom. For Stickman and all, when we started going, because we know that before Room on the Broom there was a bit more of a I think everything was on ones, and there was a bit more motion blur and that kind of stuff. But on Room of the Broom, you guys went to twos, and we loved that. And it's a real gauntlet for anyone who's trained in CGI to sort of try to replicate stop motion, because your principles have to be very sound, especially everything to do with posing. Your poses have to be very, very solid. And you realize, as I did when we started the process, is that you have this bag of tricks as a CG animator working in layers and using curves and that kind of stuff. And some of that stuff comes in helpful. In this show with Whale, definitely that stuff came in helpful, but especially with the characters like the kids and Snail, who are really like little puppets. Yeah, we had to kind of really put the animation team through their paces and make sure that their posing was solid and they were thinking about going from pose to pose. And luckily, it's something that they kind of got into. Funnily enough, it's the more senior animators who sometimes have more of a difficult time adjusting, because they're used to relying on their old bag of tricks. But it's working on twos is a lot of fun, because you get to spend a lot more time thinking about the storytelling just in that moment. You know, you have 12 frames instead of 25. So I love it. I think it's great. And you get to see the poses. The poses are kind of on screen for longer. So you get this, I think for a picture book as well, it's a really great way to do it, because you want to see an image. You don't want to just sort of see stuff moving through space. You want to really kind of have moments and feel the story unfold moment to moment.
Perhaps a last question before ending the session, very quickly, interesting question that I see as your international team, by working with artists from all around the world, what differences have you noticed in the production of animation and in any other countries?
I would say the difference is not so much within the artist, but in the production pipelines. So obviously the big studios in America work very, very different from what we do when we create a short on a very limited budget. I think for a director, the most important part is, like, we really can't afford to make a ton of mistakes. Like, we have to figure a lot of things out. We can't go back and forth because we try to get as much of our budget to actually land on screen. But the artists, I have to say, there's like super talented artists everywhere, and they kind of think alike. It's I haven't noticed the difference between artists.
Yeah, what I think is always interesting, even within our own team, because South Africa is a very diverse place. We have people with lots of different backgrounds who speak different languages at home. And just sort of finding the overlap in terms of a sense of humor, sense of timing, a sense of aesthetic, and that kind of thing. Triggerfish has had a wonderful, well, I think Mike and the team at Triggerfish, they can spot talent. And so they can spot people who even if they have a different point of view, they can quickly kind of adapt to whatever the style of the show is. And so I think it would be a surprise to a lot of people to know that a lot of that animation was done in South Africa. You know, I don't think that that's something that's obvious from the show, because it's a very British property, right? It's the beloved British author. All the voice actors are British, so yeah. So I'm very proud of the team for being chameleons.
Nice. Thank you so much, guys. I see we are out of time. Thank you so much for all your great answers. I can see in the chat, like, some people haven't watched the film yet. Some of them have. If you haven't seen the film yet, you can write to the email I shared, and you will have an access to a streaming platform where you will be able to see The Snail and the Whale, but also other films from Magic Light Pictures, and you will have an access to the making of that you guys made for the film. Thank you so much again. Thank you, CTN, as well, for hosting and having this great platform. And I mean, guys, if you want to say the word to the end, is for you.
Thank you so much. We're really honored and glad that we got the chance to show us our film, and hope you enjoy it if you get to watch it.
And thank you so much, Benoit, for the great questions and for hosting. It's been a lot of fun to chat about this stuff.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming to the talk.